Welcome, everyone. I am Kelly Oldfield, the Life Enrichment Director at Holy Cross Village at Notre Dame, here today to represent our residents. As we had initially planned to offer the Zoom call to a socially distanced, masked audience in our common space, but out of an abundance of caution, we've decided to record this session and offer it instead on our in-house channel. So on behalf of not only myself, but the residents who will enjoy listening to this discussion later, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Moderating the discussion today is Professor of Higher Education at Taylor University, Todd Ream. Also with us is Father Tom Blantz, author of the University of Notre Dame, A History. Thank you both, as well as Catherine Pitts, who's not with us today, for offering us this unique opportunity. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to you, Todd.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. I'm presently working on a series of books concerning Father Theodore M. Hesburgh, and one of the positive outgrowths of that work is the appreciation I developed for the work of Father Blantz. Today, I have the privilege of talking with Father Blantz about his most recent book, The University of Notre Dame, A History. Father Blantz was born in Massillon, Ohio, and ordained a priest with the Congregation of Holy Cross on the Feast of Christ the King, October 30th, 1960. Now President Emeritus of History at the University of Notre Dame, Father Blantz is also the author of books such as A Priest in Public Service, Francis J. Haas and the New Deal, and George N. Schuster, On the Side of Truth. The focus of today's conversation, Father Blantz's most recent book, is of great value to individuals with a wide variety of personal connections to the university, as well as scholars of contemporary religious history. His book reaches back to the political, social, and theological context out of which the congregation emerged in France through the inauguration of Notre Dame's current president, Father John Jenkins. Father Blantz, it's a pleasure to talk with you.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Todd.
If we could start by asking you about your calling to the priesthood. At what point did you know you were called to the priesthood?
When I was younger, Todd, a lot of young boys in grade school, I suppose grammar school, were thinking you know our priests in the parish very well and admired them, etc. And so I was thinking about that even through grade school. At that time also, there were high school seminaries around the country. The people did enter the seminary in high school. And there was one here at Notre Dame also. There was a friend of mine back in Massillon, Ohio, in a different parish, but I knew him and the family pretty well. And he was coming out here to high school in the seminary. And we met and he talked to me about it, and I was interested a little bit anyway. And he talked me into coming, quite frankly. I had already registered for the high school back home. I have an older brother, 2 years older than me. He was in that high school. I had registered for the high school, but kind of at the last minute why I decided I would come out to Notre Dame and join this other fellow here. It was simply a high school to discern whether you wanted to stay in the seminary, etc. My mother and father always said, you know, your room is always open back here. Anytime you want to leave, come on home. But I stayed there. The fellow I was with, he left after the 1 year and went home and became a priest in the Youngstown Diocese. But I stayed, and for 4 years of high school, it was a very good education. Then we went to the novitiate and came back to Moral Seminary here at Notre Dame and majored in philosophy. And during that time, then you kept thinking over, is this the life I wanted to live or not, and so on. And so I suppose the final decision was made about my third year of a college here when I took the final vows in the Congregation of Holy Cross. And so it was a discernment process. So it's hard to say just when did I decide to become a priest. I guess definitively when I took the final vows there in probably 19, whenever that was, in my third year of college.
Yeah. Thank you. At what point in time did you know that you were also called to be a historian?
Oh, it's a good question. Back in Massillon, we lived in a double house, and my grandmother lived on one side. And she was a little bit of a history buff, I suppose. She had little books on the presidents, pictures of all the presidents and little write-ups, and I would go over and read those with her, etc. I got interested in that. But then at Holy Cross Seminary, my high school seminary here, we had 4 years of Latin and 2 years of Greek. And in those classes, well, you did learn a lot about Roman history and Greek history and reading the old, historians, etc. And in college, I had 2 more years of Latin, 2 more years of Greek. so I did have a good knowledge of ancient history. Then I was sent to Rome to study theology over there, and that kind of whetted my appetite even more, being over there, and I could take days off and visit some of the Roman Forum and places like that. So I did get a good interest in history, and had good history teachers here, I must say, at Notre Dame also. So I suppose that gradually developed the history interest in me, and I wanted to major in ancient Greek and Roman history, but my advisors here at Notre Dame said, well, you could probably teach one course in Greek history, one in Roman history each year, but the rest you'd probably have to fill in Western European civilization and things like that. And I was more interested in American history than European history, except for ancient. So I decided to major in American history and minor in ancient history at Columbia University. So, but even from a little kid, I'd say with my grandmother, I enjoyed reading history and learning about the presidents and things like that. So I could think that gradually developed over time.
Yeah. In what ways does your calling to the priesthood and your calling to be a historian, do they complement each other? Do they conflict with each other? How have they related to one another over the course of your life?
I think they complement each other. They certainly don't conflict with each other at all. That in teaching, well, one, I was certainly was a priest the whole time. And so even while I was teaching, I was living in a student residence hall and was saying mass every day for the students. I was available, hearing confessions in the basilica and other things, being available for counseling in the residence hall with the students and so on. And then as teaching, you're helping students improve their mind. We're created in the image and likeness of God, chiefly in our intellects and wills. And so by helping someone improve their intellect, helping them to grow in the mind, etc., I think it's a very priestly thing to do, making them, helping them become more mature people, Christian people that most of them were at that time, people that to take their place in society and to make right decisions, to be able to judge correctly and express themselves correctly and things like this. That I think was you're helping other people and grow into the people they really want to become. And so I thought it was very priestly vocation also. So I never saw any conflict between the two at all. And I think they complemented each other. As a priest, you're there to help other people in their life each day. And as a teacher, I think I'm doing the same thing with them.
Thank you. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, your previous books include biography of George Schuster, and then also one of Father Francis Haas. At what point in time did you know that you also wanted to write a history of the university?
I was, as you know, Todd, I was the university archivist here from 1969 for the next 9 years. The preceding archivist, Father Tom McAvoy, had been my mentor also. He had been chairman of the Department of History for years. And so he had helped me as an undergraduate here, helping me pick history courses as electives and things like this, even while I was in Rome. And he encouraged you to write something every day. He said, if you go to bed at night and you discovered you hadn't written anything that day, he said, get up, turn the light on, and just write one paragraph. Try a dresser in your room or something, but write something every day. So I would write little articles over there about Roman Forum or about Roman buildings and things. I do some research and send them back, and he would read them and send them on to me. So he had been my mentor. He died unexpectedly in his office in 1969, and so Father Hesburgh asked me if I would be archivist and replace him, and that so I was the archivist for the next 9 years. I learned a lot about the history of the university with that, because you have all the official papers of the university there, et cetera, and helping other people coming in and doing their research and things like that. So I did get to know a lot about the history of Notre Dame as being the archivist. And eventually then, about the last 12 years of my teaching at Notre Dame, I decided to offer a seminar, a senior seminar just for senior history majors, about 15 of them each semester, once a year, on the history of Notre Dame. And they would, the main goal of the course was for each one to pick a topic they were interested in, do the research, and write about a 25-page paper on a particular topic about Notre Dame history. And so I learned a lot from their papers, et cetera, and helping them, because they picked topics that sometimes I knew nothing about. the history of the art department or the history of the cheerleaders or the history of, of the monogram club or something that I didn't know much about at all, but I learned a lot from them. And then when came time for me to retire, when I hit about the age of 79, knew I was going to retire eventually, that I wanted something to do to keep myself intellectually alive while in my retirement. And so I was looking for topics that I might pursue. And the history of Notre Dame seemed to be a logical one. At that age, I wasn't crazy about getting on airplanes and airports and traveling a lot and doing research. And so that was something I knew I could do mostly right here at Notre Dame, and the materials, the sources would be here, et cetera. So I decided just to pick that. And when I started out, Todd, I didn't know it was going to be a book. I must say, I wanted to do the research and learn more about Notre Dame. And it was whether it was going to be a book or a series of articles or just a hobby, I wasn't sure what it was going to turn out to be. Yeah. But after I got into it for a year or two, I looked like it's good to develop into a book. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And it turned out to be a book.
600 pages later. 600 plus pages later. Sorry. No, a beautiful book it's turned out to be. From start to finish then, so once you formally sort of dedicated yourself to writing that book, from start to finish, how long did it take you to write that book? And as a writer, when and where did you choose to do that work?
I suppose overall about 5 or 6 years, I suppose. So in the beginning, I was interested in just learning more about, especially Father Sorin. And there happened to be a young woman. I was living in a women's residence hall at that time as priest in residence there. And her junior year, she was studying in Angers in France. And there was a biography of Father Sorin in French that I couldn't get here. And so I just asked her, I said, if you ever see that over there, I went to buy a copy for me. And she went around to some used bookstores and found it and brought it back. And so I was more interested in just learning more about Father Sorin, I suppose, at that time. And did that and helped to improve my French, which I'd pretty well forgotten by that time. So I started that. That was about 6 years ago, I suppose, that I started that. And about 2 years after that, I suppose it began to. Then I realized it could be a book, and then I really made it into a book at that time.
Yeah, great, thank you. When approaching this project, which dimensions of it did you find most inspiring?
I'm interested in people, Todd. I suppose, as you gathered from writing 2 biographies before this, I think people are very interesting, and more than just institutional history or history from the ground up, a lot of cultural history of things, I'm interested in people. And so I suppose learning about the people themselves, learning about Father Sorin and Father Zahm and Father Hesburgh and Father Burns and Knut Rockne and Father Newland and other people like that, just learning more about them as people, I found that very interesting, very fascinating, and that is pretty well interspersed throughout the book, as you know, even other people that I just pick out of, for some reason, Father Mathis and Father Harvey and Jim Weatherby, the astronaut, and others, to pick on just a little bit about people. I'm just interested in people. So I found that very fascinating, to learn more about other people in their life and what they've accomplished.
Yeah. Which components of the work did you find most challenging then?
I think, well, obviously, at the end, putting the final touches on the book, Todd, was difficult because of the pandemic. And I couldn't get back into the archives or in the library. I couldn't get any place. And so that was a challenge. I can say the last photo in the book is a picture of Father Malloy eating a piece of cotton candy with a young woman there. Yeah. And I just presumed he was president and talking to a student. Then when I began to put I picked that picture out of the archives. And then when I wrote the descriptions of each one of those pictures, I discovered that was actually 1984, and Monk isn't president at that time. And so, but it was too late to go back and get it. I mean, there must be 500 pictures of Monk in the archives over there. I could pick another as president, but I couldn't get over to the archives anymore. And so I had to just put that one in and say, 2 years before his presidency, this is Father Malloy with cotton candy. So, and that did other things that the press would asked me to, to clarify, is this true? Should there be a quotation marks around this particular article or something? Well, I couldn't get back to the archives to check those things out. And so there was that certainly was a challenge anyway, put it that way. Other than that, the main thing would be the academic side of the university, and that's what the heart of the university. So in at least the recent chapters and even the earlier ones, I tried to discuss, the academic side and the student affairs side of the campus, the buildings, the physical side of the campus, and the athletic side of the campus when that appeared. And of those four, it was the the academic side that was hardest to do. The student affairs side was easy. You had the student newspaper and things like this that told you all about it. The buildings were easy. That came out of the papers too and things like that. There was no problem with that. The athletic side, obviously, there's a lot written on that, and the newspapers had that every day. But the academic side, that takes place in the classroom. Well, as you know, you teach education. And, how do you describe, good teaching? The teaching improved over the years more and more. You could say, well, the professors were, teaching fewer classes. We're getting better professors. We're getting better students, et cetera. So the education was better, but, where's the evidence of that or the proof for that? Hard to get statistics and things like that. So that was the more challenging side, I suppose, the academic side. And I realize that is the most important side in a way of a campus, of an educational institution, of what happens in the classroom. And it was, I could, discuss a little bit how many Rhodes Scholars we have or how many faculty awards we got and various things like that. But what really wasn't getting into what the real education takes place, in the classroom and things like that. And so that was I think I did it adequately, but with the sources available, but it was that was the more difficult thing to do, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd say certainly you did an admirable job. First and foremost, providing, sort of a perception of what the curriculum looked like and how it changed, and then providing insights into the lives of individuals who brought that curriculum, to life, as it intersected with students, but also, the faculty research as it continued to expand over time and garner not only advances in knowledge, but recognition for the university. I think those details were well presented there. So.
Thank you.
People often claim that their devotion to Notre Dame is due to its unique spirit. After writing a history of the university, how would you define that spirit?
It's a good question. It is a residential university. The students were living together in the residence halls, and it's a combination, I suppose, of socially living together like that. The religion, most of the people are, have a basis of religion, probably Christianity obviously for a large variety of those. I think the athletic programs help to tie everybody together in the spirit of the place. But I don't know. It's other universities, I'm sure, have their own spirit and their own love, or the same way with the fraternities and sororities and things like this, that people have that. But I think at Notre Dame, it probably is that combination of a religious life, even the discipline at times that the university, the administration, the rector, and that we do care for the students and we're interested in them, et cetera. The fact that we are priests, and like myself, that I was a rector, and I found that very satisfying, that you had 250 young men in that hall in a very impressionable age, et cetera, and trying to fuse the administration of the hall, make it a good run hall, and the religious aspect of it, the academic side of it, the social side of the fun to have together, the parties and athletics and things, trying to fuse all that into one happy family and so on. And I think that I found that a very interesting thing to do, very happy vocation. I enjoyed being a rector, very much, and so I think that it's that combination of all of that, for at least for the alumni looking back on it. It is a very, I think, happy 4 years of most of their lives, and you're meeting some very good people your own age and your same goals and ideals at times. So I think, and for many people, obviously, Notre Dame stood for more than that, I suppose, in for a long time, Catholics and the Irish were looked down upon by many people. You know, Irish do not apply, and there was anti-Catholic sentiment in various places. And in Notre Dame, especially in football, for example, you get national publicity under Rockney and things like this, and where people were looking down on the Irish at times. Well, it's something you can look back on and be very proud of, that here's one Catholic institution or something that you can be very, very proud of, and that are accomplishing a lot of things, beating Army in 1913 or something up the Ford Pass, and winning national championships and things like this. You know, that so I think many people that had never went to Notre Dame still you know, admired the university and thought very highly of it, and the fact that we do attract students from all over the nation, and even international students, instead of that. A lot of people do know Notre Dame graduates somewhere along the line, and they probably, you know, try to communicate that, or just it comes through that those were 4 happy years that they spent at Notre Dame, and so you have that also.
Yeah, thank you. When telling stories, historians often like to point to particular turning points, events which individually and or cumulatively impacted how a particular institution, in the case of your project, evolved. In your estimation, do any significant turning points exist in Notre Dame's history?
I think so, Todd. You could say, you know, initially, obviously, it would have to be the recovering from the fire of 1879, when the main building at that time was really almost the whole university. The ground floor is where you had the dining halls in each wing, the dining hall, and the second floor was where you had the study halls on each side, and then you had the next 3 floors with dormitories, et cetera, so that everybody lived, and yet in some of the extra rooms for priests and the faculty living there also. But that was almost the whole university, and then suddenly that building burns down completely. And so in April of 1879, and to make the decision that it was going to be rebuilt and open again in September for the next year, why that was and it was successful. I mean, they didn't have the wings on, but they had the center, and they could open it in September, and so that was certainly a turning point. That, you know, the university could have just, you know, collapsed at that time and moved to someplace else, but it didn't, and so that would certainly be one. But other than that, I would say that there may be, you know, different turning points. That when the university begun by Father Sorin in 1842, students would come. It was chartered at a university, but there were very few university students coming at that time, obviously. That there was a grade school, and you had a manual labor school, kids learning a trade. They had the high school, and then you had a college, but there were very few college people there. And that went on for, you know, a number of years. And Father Burns in 1919 decided to make it into a real college. And by that time, we had abolished the manual labor school. He abolished the high school, so made it into just a college. That was certainly a turning point. We still had the minims, those grade school kids, until 1929. But that was a turning point. Certainly, just decided it wasn't going to be a high school, and that was controversial in a way, because the high school obviously was less expensive. That obviously that you could teach more students in a high school class than you could in a college class. You could have maybe 30 people in a high school class, and only 15 in a college class. And professors in the high school were going to be, or professors in the college were going to be more expensive, higher salaries than in high school. And so by abolishing the high school, you were turning your back on, you know, a lot of revenue coming in, and try to make this into a college. But Father Burns did it, and was successful. Then after World War II, you know, I think Father Hesburgh and his predecessor, John Kavanaugh, but chiefly Father had turned it into a real, you know, university with the graduate research and the graduate program and publications and things like this, pushing the frontiers of knowledge back a little bit further and made it in. So I would think that two certainly turning points were Father Burns and Father Hesburgh making it into a real college, and then Father Hesburgh turning it into a true university, I think.
Yeah, actually, if I may, at this point, you know, I would say, Father Blantz, that one of the things that I appreciated very much about your book was how it helped me appreciate Father Burns's role and influence in how the university developed, and that if some of those changes had not have been made, then the trajectory that the university was on would not have been as amenable to things such as Father Kavanaugh and then certainly Father Hesburgh proposed. It laid the path and the groundwork for that. And so, I think anyone who looks back and sees how Notre Dame developed under Father Hesburgh's time, it merits going back and looking at Father Burns. And there's a couple of others in there too. Mm-hmm. But some of the decisions that he made along those lines seem to be key in that becoming even possible. So
I think so.
Yeah.
Father Zahm would have been another one earlier than Father Zahm would have been another one.
Yeah. Along those lines, if I may, too, part of what makes reading books such as what you wrote so enjoyable is that they include a number of heroes. So, we've already sort of mentioned a couple here. In your estimation, who would you classify as sort of some of the heroes, even if, in their imperfections too? Who are some of Notre Dame's heroes that merit consideration?
Oh, boy. I think Father Zahm, there is more interest in Father Zahm recently now. There was a doctoral dissertation done here at Notre Dame not too long ago by Jim Slattery on Father Zahm, and then Father Dave Burrell has a little book on Father Zahm also that's coming out, or has come out. And I think he's a little bit ahead of his time, that he was a scholar himself, wrote on, a scientist, but wrote on different areas. Sound and music was one. He wrote on physics and things like this. That he wrote one on theology that was looked askance at by the Vatican, of course, at trying to demonstrate that evolution. Any Catholic teacher was certainly compatible with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and things like this. The Bible was certainly compatible with that, and so. But Zahm, I think, had an idea of a real university also, and was when he was vice president of Notre Dame, and then later on as provincial superior. Well, did send some of our younger priests on for doctorates, and to make it. He wanted to make it a real university, and do that you needed terminal degrees, doctorate degrees. And so some of those, like Father Matt Walsh and Father Charlie O'Donnell, that Father Newland, the first two became presidents of Notre Dame later, and Father Newland certainly has been an outstanding scientist, chemist. I think Zahm would be one of the heroes. There was opposition to that because the finances in the 1890s with the Depression and things like that at that time, that the president at that time wanted to emphasize the high school more, because that was going to financially, that was going to keep the institution solvent. But I think Zahm just kind of predated Father Burns and his views of things. But on the other hand, he was a hard guy to get along with, and his personality grated a lot of people. But he'd be one. Heroes. In many ways, I suppose I'd have to say that people don't look at it, and that would be Rockne, not just because of the football victories in that, but for the finances of the whole thing. That Rockne is named head football coach in 1918. The next year, 1919, Notre Dame made $250 revenue from football, $250. 10 years later, that year, in 1929, it was $540,000, over $500,000 that 1 year. So throughout the 1920s, Notre Dame brought in, Sturber in his book, Shakedown the Thunder, tried to figure it out exactly how much he brought, how much every year, but it's hard to say which was gross and which was net and things. But I would say there's a couple, at least $2 million or more that Rockne brought in just from football at that time. And so once the Depression hit, and that we could continue building residence halls and building a dining hall and building an engineering building and building things like, because we had the money, thanks to Brandon Burns had that $1 million fund drive, was successful, but Rockne was bringing in a couple $1 million also. And so that I think that had an impact on Notre Dame's growth in the early 20th century that many people probably don't. So I think that that's another reason to consider him, important and kind of heroic in Notre Dame history.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Another thing that also makes reading books such as yours so enjoyable is that you get introduced to a number of individuals who stories may have escaped us. We may never have come in contact with them. And so who are some of those individuals that you think probably haven't received their due, perhaps, who would merit the consideration of people who read your book?
I think there are two other books that could be written about Notre Dame, and that is, one would be the Holy Cross Brothers and their contributions here, and the Holy Cross Sisters.
Yeah,
were here. That they, they're certainly mentioned and in the book, throughout the book, and in any history of Notre Dame, they, both groups come up, but I think they're not getting nearly the credit that they deserve. That Notre Dame was founded by, one priest and 7 brothers, as a matter of fact, in those early years. And and if it wasn't be for the sisters that did so much of the cooking and laundry and taking care of the chickens and all in the farms and things like that, they were doing so much work. And so I think that the work of the Holy Cross Brothers and the work of the Holy Cross Sisters has certainly been underrepresented, or I don't know. I would hope that the resources are available, that those stories could be told. I don't know, like the Holy Cross Sisters Archives or the Holy Cross Brothers Archives, how much material is there about Notre Dame and so on, but I think that would be, I think the first Father Walsh, Father Tom Walsh, from 1881 to 1893, I think is a very important young man, died much too early, but did a lot for after the fire and resurrection there, the buildings that went up after that, and adding a year to the high school, et cetera, and trying to upgrade the standards of academic standards of having comprehensive examinations at the end of periods and things like that, to make sure that students were learning things. That I think a good study of Notre Dame under his administration would be a worthwhile topic also. But those three, I think, the priests and the brothers and Father Tom Walsh, I think, would be very good topics to people could look at.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, one of the things that I very much appreciated about your book was just how much detail you offer in terms of the sacrifices that Holy Cross Sisters and Brothers made in the university, basically in some way sort of holding it together. Right. Sometimes physically reconstructing it and holding it together in the case of the brothers, or in the case of sisters taking care of the minions, or the feed and care, the health and well-being of those who came to the university. It was in their hands, and I thought you did an admirable job of drawing them in, because again, those are details that unfortunately for the most part have escaped me up to this point. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I tried to, certainly.
Yeah. So much of Notre Dame's story in the 20th and 21st centuries is defined by its religious, its academic, and its athletic commitments. We've already sort of touched on some of those things in particular in terms of how they've woven their way into your story that you've told. At what point do you think those aspirations were in greatest harmony with one another?
I think the administration did a pretty good job, Todd, all the way through with that. I think the university has tried to raise its academic standards continually through its history, becoming a better and better university. I think it's still trying to do that. I think that anything you do, you want to do the very best you can, and you want to be excellent in everything you're putting your hand to. And therefore, I think that was a goal in athletics also, to try to be the best we could be in athletics within the bounds of doing it all legally, et cetera, with the NCAA or whatever we were under at that particular time. Religiously, that was certainly always going along with the it was a Catholic university, a religious university, and it varied over the years. In the beginning, there was compulsory, church attendance and various things like this that we don't have now. And but the religious exercises are still available to students, chapels, and all the residence halls and things like that. So I think that the university has been quite successful in keeping them all in harmony. I can't think of it. I can think of a couple of times when maybe there's be some question. I think Father Matt Walsh in the 1920s worried a little bit about whether Newt Rockne, as being both head football coach and director of athletics, had a little bit too much power, too much influence there, and but on the other hand, it kept it under control. Rockne certainly wanted a new stadium at that time. That the stadium here at Notre Dame, Cartier Field, at the most held 30,000 people, and in 1924 he played in Soldier Field to 125,000 people. 4 times as many. So if he had a bigger stadium here, he could bring in a lot more money and things like this for the athletic department and so on. But Father Walsh insisted we were not going to build a new stadium for him, and we didn't at that time. That we had so many students still living off campus that Father Walsh, Matt Walsh, wanted to bring students back on campus, and so he built Howard and Morrissey and Lyons Halls and Sophomore Hall and Freshman Hall and a new dining hall to feed them and things like this. That those were his priorities, and Rockne, I suppose, threatened to resign a couple of times, but never did. And so I think there's a little bit of friction there, but I think they kept it. And I suppose some people could say maybe it was the same thing after World War II under Frank Leahy. Coach Leahy was both athletic director and head football coach, and whether he had a little bit too much influence or something. And but once again, I think the university administration kept things under control. That it didn't. I don't think the athletics interfered with the academic side. Students still had to go to class and all the time, and you still had to have such an average to play sports, etc. I think sometimes the coaches thought that those averages were a little bit too high or something like this, that we ought to lower them a little bit and just make them like every other students or something. Because at times, why the if a passing grade was 77 or something, well, you had to have an 80 to play varsity sports or something. And why does it have to be, etc. But that's so I think there probably was a little bit of discussion and tension at times, the religious aspect and the academic aspect and the athletic aspect. But I think the university was quite successful in melding those together into I can't think of any real problems that came up in that area.
Father Hesburgh's leadership of the university defines approximately 3 chapters of the book. And in terms of the stories about Father Hesburgh that are in the book, is any one or two of them perhaps more important in your mind than others? Do you have a favorite or two you think that it would be worth noting?
Well, I would agree with him that he always insisted that his 2 major contributions to the university were the 1967 decision to put it under a separate board of trustees and make University of Notre Dame a separate corporation from the Congregation of Holy Cross, and to put it under a lay board of trustees. And I think he considered that certainly one of his 2 major accomplishments. And the second was, of course, to admit undergraduate women to the university and make it a co-education school in 1972. And so I would certainly agree that those are 2 of his most important achievements. I would add a third, and that was getting through the 1960s and 70s with all the student unrest and agitation and things like this as successfully as he did. There's so many other universities, well-known president, Clark Kerr, out in California, and Grayson Kirk at my own Columbia in 1968. I got my degree at Columbia in 68, so I was right in the middle of all that, in a way. That so many other presidents lost their jobs and things like this, and universities that somehow we got through here at Notre Dame without that. And I think, and a lot of the credit went, I think, was Father Hesburgh. He was the one that I think he handled it very well. I don't know how he slept at night. He always insisted it didn't bother him that much, that he could go to sleep about 5 minutes after he hit the pillow, but I don't know if that was true in some of those nights that he admits that each day when he got up, he was just, you know, what are they going to do today and how am I going to react to that? There's going to be some surprises every day. And but he got through it, and I think, you know, very successfully. And even those students that you had difficulties with at times, looking back now, love the place and are, you know, some of our most loyal alumni, etc. So I think that would be, for me, a third, you know, accomplishment that he should take a lot of credit for.
No, I would agree. One of the items that may be in the archives that I've always meant to see if I could locate it, but have yet to do so, was that he reportedly kept a list with him of presidents, primarily friends of his, who had unfortunately lost their positions through that stretch of time. Yes. And had that written down on a piece of paper. And I wondered if that piece of paper didn't somehow get kept and then filed somewhere, because, yeah, I'd be interested to see what names he wrote down, many of which I could guess, but also if there weren't any sort of lessons learned that he then noted beside those names too, that he then kept in mind. When you read his autobiography, it makes it sound like he, you know, the 60s were a challenge and he managed to make it through. And yes, as you know, this is his accounting, he slept great during that period of time. It wore on him, I think, a little more than he let on, and that's certainly understandable during that period of time. And some of that comes out in your work and other work that's been done on him. But I would agree, just to be able to have a presidency that arcs across the 1960s and into the early to mid 70s, and it is in and of itself an impressive feat, given the challenges at that time. In terms of
experience with him at that time was certainly would confirm that, because I was vice president for student affairs from 70 to 72. And so when problems would come up and I discussed them with him or something, well, he was very calm about it. And he had excellent insights on what decisions we might make, et cetera. And, but it was never indicated to me that he was, overly worried or concerned or something, that he was just confident that it would work out okay. If it doesn't, I will just make another decision. And then that's the way you do it. And I personally learned a lot from him for that reason. And I remember talking to him once when coming out of dinner at Corby Hall and going over to our offices. And I just told him, I said that I made a decision this morning, Ted, and now that I look back on it, I don't think it might not have been the right one. And so, it might come up to you. You might have to overturn it. And well, I hadn't. And I remember he just turned me and said, "Look, Tom," he said, don't ever make a decision twice. He said, "Don't look over your shoulder at the last decision you made. You're going to miss the one coming at you. Just make it the best you can and let it go 4 to 5 times. It'll be the right one. And if it's the wrong one, we can overturn it," or something like that. So never make the same decision twice.
And during that season, it wasn't just the next one coming at you. There were likely 3 or 4 coming at you at any one time. So.
Yeah. Yeah. He was always, my experience, always calm and thoughtful, could think it over, and his instincts were very good. He made the right decisions usually, and I think he was confident that it would happen. But I think he did have some sleepless moments anyway.
Yeah. No, that would have certainly been understandable. Are there any stories about him that didn't make the book that you think also merit noting?
I heard this one third hand, Todd. I don't know if it's true or not. I hope it is. But when General Pinochet took over in Chile, down there, that we had a school down there, and it was some of the people there, I suppose, were, well, certainly seemed more we're trying to teach the Catholic social teachings and things like this, the rights of workers, the rights of the poor, and things like this, equality, etc. And that the Pinochet regime thought it was a too liberal a university, and they decided to take it over and kick Holy Cross out and so on like that. And so the provincial superior asked Father Hesburgh if he would go down and try to talk to the leadership down there and convince them, not to take over the school, not to give it to somebody else. And the story I heard was that the Pinochet's office was on a kind of higher floor of this government building, maybe the 8th floor or something. And he had appointed a admiral, a friend of his, an admiral in the Navy, to be the superintendent of schools or secretary of education. And so this fellow met Father Hesburgh, and they went up the elevator together, and he was trying to be gracious, I suppose, to Father Hesburgh or something. And he mentioned to Father Hesburgh on the way up that if there's anything, that you need to know about education here and something like that, why, feel free to ask me. I'd be willing to help. And I heard that Ted just looked at him and told him, there's nothing you can tell me about education, but I'll certainly call on you if I ever want to learn how to row a boat. I don't know whether that's true or not. It's not like something that Ted could say, but to tell an admiral, you call on him, you want to know how to row a boat.
Well, interesting.
I heard that third hand from somebody who heard it from somebody who was in the elevator with Ted going up there, but that's third hand.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's true.
Yeah. The exact nature of that conversation wasn't captured in these documents that I've seen, but one of the things that I've reviewed in relation to my work on Father Ted is his FBI file. And there are notes in there about his meeting in Santiago with General Pinochet about, I believe this is St. George's School in particular that you're referencing there. And then also there's in some the WikiLeaks documents, there are also some details about his meeting down there. Also some details about his meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev too. There were people tailing him at the time there. It was interesting that, there's nothing subversive though that was noted about him in those, but there's likely some other sources, at least around what you heard, that say that conversation could very well be true. So, yeah. Authors are often far more aware than their critics of details that they wish were in their books, but cut by editors, publishers, etc. Is there anything that you wish that would have been added to your otherwise impressive history of the university that you think merits noting?
There were some things that I did cut out. There was parts of during the Civil War, there were things that I cut that out, cut that down. And part of it also was with relationships with St. Mary's during the Civil War. General Sherman had his son here at Notre Dame, and his daughter Minnie was at St. Mary's. And so there were things over there that I think both schools, for example, decided that there should be no, we had people from the North and the South, obviously in both schools, and that there should be, everybody should try to remain neutral, at least publicly, about this. And Minnie over at St. Mary's, for example, she always wore a pretty big flag, I think, on her, for a Union flag on her blouse or something like that. And one of the other students from the South or something ripped it off of her or something. And the people in authority over there suggested she shouldn't be wearing that to antagonize these other students or something. And she answered something, if my father's out there defending his flag with his life, why his daughter can certainly wear one on her blouse when she's going to school. And so there's stories like that happened during the Civil War. But on the other hand, I'd say some of them were with the women at St. Mary's because Minnie was a little bit older. And so but I left those out, figured, well, the book was, as you say, very long to start with. And it was about Notre Dame. And so these stories about St. Mary's were very interesting and so on. But on the other hand, that if you had to cut out something, why those were probably things to cut out. And they said I could have done more, I suppose, with some of the better legendary teachers at Notre Dame. The Emil Hoffmans and people like this were very outstanding teachers. Frank O'Malley and modern Catholic authors that people look back on and tremendous experience, tremendous influence they had on them and so on. But, and I debated that because I say the academic side maybe is a little bit weak in places there, and I could, but on the other hand, it's 750 pages, so that was, I wasn't looking for ways to make it any bigger. But those, I suppose, would be, and if I could find the material, I would like to have said more about the brothers and the sisters also, but I didn't have that information.
Yeah. Thank you, Father Blantz. The book again is The University of Notre Dame, A History by Father Tom Blantz. And again, I would say that if one's interests are of a personal nature in the university and their connections, the book is an exceptional read. If one's interests are scholarly in nature and where the university fits in the larger landscape of contemporary religious history, the book makes for an excellent read too, one that I would commend. Thank you for your time, Father Blantz.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, also.
Yeah, what a great discussion. On behalf of Holy Cross Village at Notre Dame and the community here, thank you, Todd, for organizing such well thought out questions. Clearly you did the research in advance of this discussion. And Father Tom, my goodness, your penchant for dates and facts and figures. Oh my goodness, holy cow, you rattle those off as if there's some cheat sheet beside the computer. I doubt there is.
It's right here and it is mine.
Yeah. So I know, Todd, you referenced the book, but if you're a resident watching and are interested in purchasing a copy of Father Tom's book, please read the newsletter for more details on that. And with that, we'll say farewell. Thank you for tuning in and be well.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Bye-bye.